Yes. Welcome to the Dave Shove Midstream Reading Series. My name is Richard Terrill. If you were here for the music, thanks for listening. If not, welcome. I want to tell you before we start that we have a website, and it is midstreamreadingseries.wordpress.com for FYI. And if you're a first-time visitor to our readings, which I suspect some of you might be, and you'd like to be on the mailing list to get the Zoom invitation for future readings, you can just send me an email, richard.terrill at mnsu.edu. And my email address is also on the information that you got about tonight's reading. So if you want to be on the mailing list, we don't bug you or anything, but once a month you'll know what's going on. And also before we begin, I want to make sure to thank Paul Matties, who's running tech for us, and without whom, believe me, none of us would be here. It wouldn't be happening. So thanks, Paul. We really appreciate everything you've done. And while we can't sell you books, as we would if we were in Papa John's attic, and I'm not going to take the time to give you contact information for each of tonight's readers. You know how to find them. You know, we're old hands at this. So buy books, and buy these books by these four writers, please. So as is the custom, I'll read one poem of my own, and this is from my new book, there you go. What Falls Away is Always, Poems and Conversations, from Holy Cow Press. It's out, but officially out September 1st, and the book launch, this is the last commercial, I promise. The book launch will be September 13th at 7 p.m. on Facebook Live, my Facebook page. You can find me. I'm the only Richard Terrill on Facebook holding a saxophone, playing a saxophone. So that's how you know you're in the right place. So I thought maybe a quiet poem, given what's going on. And this is the first poem in What Falls Away is Always. So first poem in the book, so maybe works as the first poem of the evening. And it's on the paintings of Edward Hopper, which everybody knows. On Edward Hopper. It's not so much that he's looking at nothing, but that there is nothing to look at, and we see it too. A style which purports to show how gas pumps in a line raise their heads and weak shoulders above a solitary man in shirt sleeves. How on Sunday another man can sit on a boardwalk outside buildings awash in gold. He looks like an ex-boxer, gartered sleeves, bald, forearms resting on thighs. Otherwise, people are extraneous. Cafe patrons study their teacups. Women, nudes, stand looking into severe light, the source of which we may severely misunderstand. Three mannequins in conference gather as if human, merely because one of them can kink an arm into a gesture, and a buxom one can stand so straight that her cupped hands seem to betray a desire for prayer. All the other tables, all the sidewalks, and the thoroughfare are not so much empty as filled with space, and with the hoods of enormous cars, the long backs of divans, the high roofs and gables, the black pupils of paired windows looking out to what must be the sea. Now, to our featured performers. First, Joyce Sutphen. Joyce Sutphen grew up on a farm in Stearns County, Minnesota. Her first collection of poems, Straight Out of You, won the Barnard New Women Poets Prize. Her most recent books are The Greenhouse, published by Salmon Poetry Ireland in 2017, and Carrying Water to the Field, New and Selected Poems, published by the University of Nebraska Press, 2019. She is the second Minnesota Poet Laureate, succeeding Robert Bly, and she is Professor Emerita of Literature and Creative Writing at Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota. Joyce Sutphen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that, Dick, and for the music. And thanks to Larry and attendant spirits. Thanks to all the people that take turns hosting the series. And thanks to Paul Mattis, because he's awesome, and to my fellow readers and the audience, and all the birds in the sky, I guess. I'm going to read all new poems. That is, I've decided to do it, and it's too late to change it. So here you go. And most of the poems are written this spring, this pandemic, whatever it is. It doesn't even seem like it's a season anymore. There's just lots of time, and we can't believe it's August already. So I'm gonna keep to my time, and so I'm not going to talk all that much in between. I just will say one or two things. I'm looking at you, Dick, because you're my screen is set so that you're the main person. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna change it somewhere. Okay. All right. So the first poem is just a short invocation, and I like it because I feel like I didn't write it. It just wrote, the words just kind of came as notes as I was doodling something else. Unerring muse. Oh, come, live with me and hang my words in air. Let each line be measured by the joy it carries. Let every sound and syllable be what is needed. I stumble and falter, but you, unerring one, know, like the birds, singing away the darkness, that nothing has changed and everything has. So I love this sonnet. I love that shape, that little room. And I memorized a lot of Shakespeare's sonnets. So if you hear a little bit of, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, thou art more lovely and more temperate, in this poem, it's on purpose. Summer days. Shall I compare them to what? As I remember, the winds were rough in May. The lilacs rusted, the peonies scattered, and now the William Baffin roses are already losing their first bloom. Sometimes the heat we so desired in January is too hot in July. It's just the way it goes. The sun beats down and covers everything in gold. The green world, which seemed as if it would last forever, is hazing over the woods and meadows where a single sumac leaf, red, burning like a blaze of fire, hangs at the top of a bush. Look, you can see it turning. And another sonnet that was part of a little trio, and I'm just going to read the before, except the first word is afterwards, so you get part of the trio already. Before. Afterwards, we often spent hours talking about how we had lived before, back in the days when we could go where we wanted, before people started dying, and the world, that is, the world as we knew it then, shut down. Afterwards, we spoke in terms of before and after, telling each other things we learned as the markets crashed and the store shelves emptied. Sometimes one of us would ask a device to play an old song, something by Dylan or the Beatles, and all day we'd listen to one song leading into another and see our lives pass like clouds that we could only see from one side now. Hope you get that illusion at the end there. Okay, this one's a sort of villanelle. I think I like the form a sort of villanelle. And we live on a 100-acre marsh, and we try almost every day to walk around that marsh. It's about a 3-mile walk. So this is walking around the marsh. Halfway around, we meet the woman we sometimes see on the indoor track, but not these days, not now. And we greet each other, but we do not stand and talk the way we would have done in other times, even though it is a lovely day, sky blue, air soft. We do not linger, not these days, not now. And when we see the young couple with their sweet dog, we do not call him to us as we did in other times, even though our doggy friend wags his tail and pulls the leash. We do not stop to pet him, not this time, not today, because touching could be dangerous and you can't be too careful. Certainly not now, though it seems we used to worry about nothing. Okay, I'm going to read a skinny poem. I have a series of that form, whatever it is. And I love rhubarb. And when the rhubarb came this year, this is the poem that came with it. Early rhubarb. Each piece is small and slender, a red so deep it pools at the bottom of the stalk like a ruby. We'd found the rhubarb just beyond the grapevines. It was May, Mother's Day. You pulled out the stalks. I cut off the poison leaves and let them lie in the wet grass. Years later, we would remember how we stood on the back porch, pretend hugging the ones we loved. And that after the silent ride with nothing to keep us away, we made a rhubarb crisp so perfect that it is hard now to decide whether it was the sugar sweetening the rhubarb or the rhubarb stealing the sweetness right out of the sugar. I'm sorry, I blew that last line. That was a good one, but oh well. This next one is inspired by the Larry McDonough group. I don't know whether to call you a duo or a trio or a quartet, but and it's one of the songs on the album that Larry mentioned, Allison Stonehenge, is Tango para Maria Luisa, and I love that very much. And so and my granddaughter Ellie loves to dance, so I put those two together. And this is, well, it was Tango for Ellie, but I think Eliana, her real name, sounds kind of better, doesn't it? Tango for Eliana. The music begins, string bass and drums and saxophone and a piano. The steps go like this, slow, slow, quick, quick, slow. For now, your partner is the moon, and just for this night, your hair is black and full of stars. The melody is steady as rain, sweet as bird song, a little something you can carry in your ear something to carry you through the years. So that is Tango for Eliana. Oh, and this is the new poem for Ellie. That was the oldest poem actually, and that was a birthday poem last year or the year before. This one is this year, and it's called The Garden. Let's see if I can do this right. You've changed, said the morning light to the rose in the garden as a petal slipped away and floated to the lawn. How kind of you to notice, said the rose. There's a little cloud on the horizon that wasn't there an hour ago. I know, said the cloud, and by noon I'll be a storm. And then watch out, tree. There are winds that could pull you from that place in the sky where you've lived for so long, said the tree. I have always loved the way the wind goes where it pleases. Okay, I don't know, does that work? Well, tell me later. And one more poem. This is for a grandson who's went off to college yesterday, and I just wanted to write him something. So this is called Rescue Poem. The poem I wanted to write is still sleeping. What can I say? It was up late, imagining ways to please you. It turned into a puppy and did tricks. It barked and chased its tail on command. What a good little doggy, you said. Good puppy, good girl. The poem was so happy it wagged its tail and ran around in circles. All it wanted was attention. But I wanted it to be the kind of poem that comes out of the woods with a piece of rope in her mouth and drops it at your feet. You wonder what the poem is saying as she pulls you toward the path and barks in almost human words. Finally, you follow the poem back into the woods where someone you love is caught in quicksand, and thanks to the poem, you just happen to have a good rope. Okay. I think I have too many puppies in my poems tonight, but I think that is because all the world has decided they need a puppy, at least lots of people I know. So I think I have about a minute or so left, and I think I'm going to be silly and bold and play another poem that's sort of inspired by Dick and Terry's and Larry's wonderful music and jazz, and also my friend Phil Bryant at St. Peter, who's one of the best poets writing about jazz, I think there could be. And this brings in my growing up on a farm a little bit, and it's called The Cows Get Down, for Phil Bryant. They were all Stearns County cows, Holsteins, but they had names like Maggie and Babe, Billy and Hatch. Sometimes when we were sleeping, they'd have a jazz night, stomping in their stanchions and blowing their horns like Dizzy and Coltrane, bebopping and boogie-woogieing. Or sometimes they joined the circus for the night and climbed one after another out of the tiny door to the milk house in their black and white pajamas, riding the clown car all around the barn, singing Mood Indigo until the crack of dawn. I do think I've run out of time. I thank you very much.
That's interesting. I know so many people who don't even know.
I am sorry. I was silly, and I didn't mean to be that silly. But I think
That was Joyce Sutphen. The next reader is William Reichard. He's a writer, editor, and educator. His sixth poetry collection, The Night Horse, New and Selected Poems, was published by Bright Horse Books in 2018. His seventh book, a collection of prose poems, will be published in 2021. William Reichard.
Hello. Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was muted or not. I just want to thank Larry and Paul and the rest of the readers tonight. I've never done a Zoom reading before, so I've been teaching on Zoom since March, but this is a little different. Here's the book. Anyway, it's a 19th century French stop motion photo study of horses running. So I'm just going to read a few poems from here, and then if there's time, I can read a couple of new things from, I have a new book coming out about a year from now, a book of prose poems. So, okay. It's called Clara's Vision, Appalachian Trail. We drove for hours across terrain I couldn't recognize, through small towns that read, church, church, feed store, church. We arrived near sunset, when the light was gently capping each ridge, cutting the edges of rocks in red, pink, gray. I didn't know what heaven was, but perhaps this was it. Clouds sweeping gravel paths, granite disappearing, then reappearing in the mist, small peaks poking out of miniature white mountains within mountains. The air was thin. I thought I might faint. You pointed along the serpentine path and told me it went all the way up to Canada. How far was that? How many lifetimes would it take to traverse that distance? Since I'd met you, I'd only wondered more and more how one can come to be saved. I mean, truly saved, not the down on your knees begging to be forgiven saved, but the kind where each of us come to know ourselves, radiance and repulsion aside, just simply to know ourselves. I thought you'd found that, and I wanted it too. As the sun set, the path began to fade into an impenetrable darkness. You said we'd hike the whole trail one day, and I believed you. Then back to the truck for the long ride home. I didn't know what heaven was, but I wanted to believe you did. That was from my friend Kitty Couch. Really wonderful, wise woman who died a few years ago in a taxi accident in Vietnam. She was always going on an adventure. She was like 90 years old and, off to see another country she'd never been to. This one's called Horses in Snow. Fading dusk turns the snow into stars, the sky and the horizon line into a black dome. The only world I know exists in the twin beams of my headlights. I'd forgotten what it's like driving a country road in a blizzard, the way the wind swirls the snow across the road in eddies like water on a troubled lake. I'd forgotten the hypnotic effect of the flakes flying at the windshield, how my eyes try to focus on each flake, lose sight of the road itself. I've never been afraid of night in the city, but night in the country, the storm enveloping everything, makes all of the folk tales true. All of the cautionary monsters stalk the forest that fences in the freeway. I become a child behind the wheel, a boy sent on a man's errand because there is no one else. I drive slowly from village to village, seeking out the safety that will not be found. When the tires hit a patch of ice, I'm pulled back into myself, back into the doubled view of the headlamps, and as the car reaches the top of a rise, its lights shine into a bend in the road, a pasture beyond. There, for a moment, stand dozens of horses. Some are unmoving under blankets of snow. Some are feeding from hay-filled troughs. And one is galloping, moving fast as me, head down, trying to outrun the storm. Sorry, that noise is my cat trying to get into the office. I had to close the door. So he'll be with me. It's one called The Little Bird. Giotto's frescoes of the life of St. Francis are still there, though shelling in the war and the work of an earthquake have left them in ruins. Yet the work survives. Francis grew up wealthy, gave away everything he owned, and removed himself from the world. After, there was poverty, contemplation, and an uncanny ability to communicate with the animals. The mantle of sanctity is a heavy burden, enough to break a man's back. Who can withstand it? In one of the intact frescoes, a small brown bird is captured in flight. It's a simple thing, a tiny wren, pale brown against the plaster's inky blacks. All of these centuries, it's been going someplace, but being mortal, we'll never know where. After Francis received the gifts from his God and began to suffer as his Savior suffered, did the bird fly toward or away from heaven? Let's see here. Short one here. This one's based on a news story. I find inspiration anywhere I can, I guess. And this was from a newspaper article. It's called Two Young Men in Another Country. From nooses tied to the arm of a crane, they hang. This is the preferred method of execution, the newscaster says. No steps to the gallows, no drop of the trapped body falling, neck snapped. Instead, a crane with noose tied to a mechanical arm, rope tightened around each man's neck, steel arm raised so the men die slowly as the crowd screams in approval. If these men, 18, maybe 20 years old, must die for who they are, may they have done what they wanted to do. May their lips have known one another, their tongues together tangling slowly. May they have seen one another naked, erect, made love in the heat of the day, the light's rays painted across their bodies. May theirs not be a thwarted love, a longing only. Let them, as the crane's arm raises, turn to face each other and leave this world with open, loving eyes. It was a newspaper story about an execution of two young gay men. And the last one I'll read from the book is called Mourning Doves. I suppose their call is melancholy, though I've never found it so. Or more precisely, I've never found it out of place on quiet summer days, because there is a sense of melancholy stitched into the season. The whole world goes wild in bloom. Trees leaf out to the point of bursting. The air scent is cut grass and clover heating in the high sun. This can't last. It's a celebration in the manner that the dance of death is a celebration, a nod to the inevitability of transformation. A mourning dove calls out. It sounds utterly alone, though it isn't. It sings perhaps of a love that lasts beyond loss. I share with my mother a tenderness for lesser beauty, whatever is ragtag, slightly frayed, left over, or abandoned. We love the birds without splendid plumage, the animals left after the storm, all of those who sing into the distance and hope that someone answers back. How are we doing for time? Okay. Maybe I'll just read two short pieces. So the new book is called Our Delicate Barricades Down. I guess the best I could describe it as Spoon River Anthology by Edgar Lee Masters. If that married Wisconsin Death Trip, this book would be their baby. It's all based around the idea of Midwestern landscape. And so this is a Midwestern landscape poor. The shuttered bar's wall collapses, falls into the laundromat. Dirty clothes for days and nowhere to wash the oversized blankets, the heavy quilts stitched from remnants of grandmother's dresses. Winter is coming, so they get out the lath and heavy plastic. I knew families who lived like that, broken windows patched with canvas tarps, frozen breath-forming clouds in the unheated kitchen. I knew families who depended on the meat their man would hunt each autumn. No game meant nothing to eat, shamefaced trips to the food shelves. A semblance of strength trumped the cries of a hungry child. And I would see these kids in the school hallways, pale and thin, lacking breakfast and focus. I was one of those kids, always could spot my kind, missing dead fathers, mothers eaten up by poor pay at local factories. Someone might ask, how poor are you? But you couldn't say, not to teachers, not to friends. Silence equals strength, the ability to deny yourself everything. Those houses are empty now, bankrupt or abandoned, farmsteads unable to support any family. I see them on my way to visit my elderly mother. The animals take over and trees grow up through kitchen floors. Upper bedrooms become aviaries full of birds and owls that eat the birds, with bats sequestered in every corner. Is there time for one more? I can't tell. Okay. All right. Okay. This is called Midwest Landscape, We Lutherans. I grew up in the Wisconsin Synod Lutheran Church, which was a bit conservative. Polished deep into the pale blonde pews, polished deep into the plain wooden cross on the altar of austerity, in the sanctuary of silence where only the pastor ever spoke in words above a whisper, every breath, cough, sneeze, or rustle of tissue-thin hymnal pages was heard and commented on later by the ladies who served lunch in the basement after service. Such plainness in the architecture, as if God would grow angry at any hint of the ostentatious. We couldn't find God in a house too holy for anyone not born in or related to anyone else in the area. We lost our faith listening to the whispered laughter of our neighbors, who found humor in the holes of the soles of someone's shoes, made visible when she knelt to take communion. Between the modulating notes of the tone-deaf soprano and the stern sermons against desire, there was no space to breathe. Between moderation in every action and modesty implicitly demanded, there was no life. In the brown pews and the unadorned altar, in the invisible Christ on the pure blonde cross, I grew distrustful. Life in our town seemed to be lived in the darker corners, away from the light of the pebble glass windows and the looks the neighbors gave because our family's anonymous donation envelope didn't sound heavy enough when our mother dropped it into the tarnished silver collection bowl each Sunday. And I will end there.
Okay. I'm listening to a poetry reading.
That was William Reichard. Kris Bigalk is a writer and professor based in Minneapolis. Her second poetry collection, Enough, was recently released by NYQ Books. She's also the author of the poetry collection Repeat the Flesh in Numbers. Bigalk has published poetry in many literary magazines and anthologies and publishes creative nonfiction and reviews. She has won 2 Minnesota State Arts Board grants in poetry. Kris founded and directs the AFA and Creative Writing program at Normandale Community College and serves on the boards of AWP, Association of Writers and Writing Programs, and Rain Taxi Review of Books. Kris Bigalk.
Thanks so much, Dick. This is my book. It came out in November, and this has been my first reading since we've all been locked down. So thank you very much for that. I was so excited to be reading with Joyce and Bill and Max because I've read their poems for years, and I was thinking, what is it that they all have in common? And for me, it's that they evoke a sense of place so well. I really feel like I'm in the places that they describe. My book is it was generated during a divorce. It ends hopefully. It's kind of about that progression from love to uncoupling to learning a lot about yourself. And as I was choosing poems to read tonight, I thought about how they'd sound a little different during this time in the pandemic. I also realized I only have one poem set in the summer, so I'm going to start with that one. It's called Singular. I wonder if I've ever been on the right side of love. Love always seems so quick, so difficult to catch, like a dragonfly, amber and glowing on a sunflower. Gone the second I try to clasp my hands around him. I let love go free and he never returned, which according to bad greeting cards means he was never mine to begin with, that he never saw me as an attractive jailer or keeper. I never really wanted a beautiful prisoner anyway. If love could alight on my shoulder in this sunset, translucent wings catching pink and gold, tiny legs perching on my skin, that might be the closest I come to speaking with God in this life. The next poem I'm going to read is the title poem of the collection. It's called Enough. In these last weeks before everything goes blank, white, let's soak ourselves in maple leaves the color of summer poppies and marigolds. Let them scent our skin with cinnamon must. Let's kick puffballs and watch the spores glide in a cloud to find a place to sleep for winter. Let's gather fallen twigs and branches, run our hands along the green mossed bark. Let's forget, just for a few weeks, we have nothing left to say to each other, that we've unlearned our common language, that we have no power to turn ourselves back to the green, unbent selves we can barely remember, except in dreams or blurry old photos. For now, close your eyes, let the cold wind wash over your bare head, and just hold my hand. It will be enough. This poem is called Missing. I picked it because we're missing a lot of things right now, I feel like. Missing. Long gone belonging, a silver earring, loop hooked around itself, fashioned after its twin, or maybe before, longing so long it curved to meet itself so the longing would stop or be infinite, dispersed throughout itself like blood inside the fascia of a wire, electricity feeding itself against the sparking at either end. To miss is to long too long, unbent, uncurving. To miss is to follow the road and not stop to consider the ocean, the dome of the sky. To miss is to lose oneself like a waterfall forgets how to fall in winter, silvered into a mimicry of itself, a frozen forgetfulness. This next poem is called Crow Pose. I do yoga and it's kind of a difficult pose to do. And I guess that's all I'm going to say before I start. Crow pose. After balance is lost, the limbs tumble, push into the floor, the solid flatness cold against the rounded muscles of calf, of forearm. Crow, how do you tip into the perfection of strength and humor, dipping your beak to the water, then lifting your throat so it washes into you, turning your body to black rivulets, feathers catching the sunlight black and blue. Turn over the glitter of coins, the foil of thoughts unresolvable. Let me balance on my three-pronged foot, crow. Let me learn to fly while facing down the earth. Joyce mentioned that one of her poems had some allusions to Shakespeare. This one has lots of allusions to lots of poems, so I hope that you catch some of them. Where the light shines through. I find pieces of myself in poems written before I was born, about fat gold watches and nude arms waving, about Jennifer's tigers and Blake's tiger, about bending with the remover to remove. I find pieces of myself on the bathroom floor, skin and fingernail shavings, hair, each tiny fragment rife with my DNA, that microscopic cipher, blueprint of all my imperfections. I find pieces of myself in the back of the closet, clothes that used to fit every curve, so I felt beautiful, so I shone. Putting the puzzle together can be so difficult. The picture shifting, the pieces static. Some days I almost finish, and when I look in the mirror, I try not to notice the blank places where the light shines through. About 10 years ago, I took a really wonderful trip to Norway. And this poem was inspired by that trip because it was during the night that had no end, the midsummer night. The speed of light. In Trondheim, the light spoke. The light lined the streets like white fox fur. The light soaked through the red-stained glass into the caverned cathedral as it had for 1,000 years. Light fingered the edges of evening as if hemming a nightgown, never quite letting go. Light cast itself against my body to cast a long shadow against the gray stone buildings. Light pried open the roses. Light circled me like an impatient dog, whether I ran or stood still. In Uppsala, the light was silent. The light dusted the stone's gold in Linnaeus's garden, settled itself at his grassy table. Light chased the red and blue bocce balls strewn on the court, turning the grass translucent. Over a hollow willow tree, the light coaxed out green branches from the apparently dead wood and led their delicate leaves down into a pond, a veil of shadows, an artifact of thought, only visible when I stood still, only palpable when I walked through it. Okay, so just a couple more. This poem has a kind of a cool story. It's a very short poem. Lori Herzl is a friend of mine on Facebook, and she wrote a sentence, and I said, can I have that? Because I want to use it to start a poem. And she said, sure. So I'm giving credit to Lori for the first few words of this poem. This morning, the park, full of trilling bright bluebirds, empty of people. Cerulean brushstrokes flit from tree to tree, 16th notes blooming on a staff of a dewy cast iron fence. Silence like a gate ajar, waiting for warm wind to blow open shade today. And I'll read one more. It's the very last poem in the collection. It is a sonnet. It's not a perfect one, so you may not hear the rhymes, but it is a sonnet. My Narcissus. The rag I use to clean the floor is flannel, green plaid, a scrap of the shirt I bought for you 10 years ago, that you wore every weekend, soft and warm, clad for the sharp fall afternoons, raking leaves, wind blown, the winter nights by the fireplace, keeping us warm, the the spring planting of apple trees, willows, and bulbs, the summer nights tending the fire pit, watching the morning star rise in an arc. That shirt held the sweet smell of smoke, and even now, as I scrub, the scent of charcoal burnt rises out of the soapy rag, and I wonder if you ever think about the parts of you that got lost, if what you prize has changed since we last spoke. Whether scent or stink, the cloth sticks to my thoughts, reminds me of the old you, whose lonely offices brought me joy, who never knew. Thank you.
That was Kris Bigalk. Max Garland is the author of The Word We Used for It, winner of the 2017-18 Brittingham Poetry Prize. Previous books include The Postal Confessions, winner of the Juniper Prize for Poetry, and Hunger, Wide as Heaven, which won the Cleveland State Poetry Center Open Competition. He has received an NEA Poetry Fellowship, a Michener Fiction Fellowship, a Bush Foundation Poetry Fellowship, inclusion in Best American Short Stories, and fellowships in both poetry and fiction from the Wisconsin Arts Board. Born and raised in Kentucky, where he worked as a rural letter carrier on the route where he was born, he is Professor Emeritus at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, recent writer-in-residence for the city of Eau Claire, and the former Poet Laureate of Wisconsin. Max Garland.
Thank you. I'll start this poem, start reading one for William. He had a little bit of religion in his reading, and so I thought I would run with that. My uncle was a Pentecostal minister in Kentucky, and he had a Lincoln Continental, which was got 8 miles per gallon in town, such as it was, and a whopping 12 miles on the highway, which had just barely been built. So this is for my Uncle William. Memories of Pentecost. I had an uncle who healed by faith and drove a Lincoln, smack in the middle of the forehead with the palm of his hand, and the eyes wobbled in their sockets. Sound like a ribbon unfurled from his tongue. It might have been Hebrew. It might have been Chickasaw. It may have had something to do with marrying cousins. Who's to say? It wasn't the blow of grace itself. The organist beating the hymn like a bad child. The ceiling fan spinning as if the roof might fly away. And even if the Spirit missed me by an eyelash, a whisker, a country mile, even if Sunday after Sunday I dodged the white arrow that pierced the true apostles, it was enough to know it was somewhere in the family, somewhere in my uncle, flapping like a wild bird in his chest as he touched them, as he let them go, the organ swooping down like a train at a crossing, as he danced his little dance, one step, then a wiggle, sweet Jesus, sweet jangle, the keys to that Lincoln alive in his pocket. I'll read another poem from Kentucky. Orion Spur. Orion is the arm of the galaxy in which we reside, upon which we reside, I suppose you could say. And this Orion Spur is the little offshoot about halfway up that arm of the galaxy where we actually are. My grandfather was a farmer, lived next to him. And what this poem, I think, kind of resides on is the idea of how motion keeps repeating itself. Whenever I grow, I'm looking right now out at my back deck where I'm growing tomatoes. And the tomatoes are a great thing. I have a whole bunch of them. My granddad taught me to grow them. But the real miracle, the real reason for growing tomatoes, I mean, I eat them and all, but it's the smell of the leaf that resurrects my grandfather. And that to me is what this poem is based upon. It's called Orion Spur. I like it here, just above the elbow of the outflung arm of the galaxy. I like the way objects retain the history of motion in their shapes, and things that aren't still appear. Make yourself useful, my grandfather said, handing me a hoe or hammer or spool of jute to tie up tomato vines. I like the tentacled way the galaxy flowers and spins, and how dust catches your eye when lit and far away. You feel the weight at the center like a negative sun, or the immense concentration of God. Everything wants inward, but the wanting whirls it outward, like when funnels of dust rose and twisted across the drought-struck fields. Make yourself useful, he'd say. I'd unwind the hose and drag it between furrows. Then moan and complaint from the engine in the pump house would commence, and the sprinklers spin and the water shine like the soul of the well released. Then evening, back when stars were still visible, though some weren't stars at all, I know now, but galaxies themselves, or clusters of galaxies, or superclusters. But what I remember was how the fronds of the new shoots rose and climbed the next day. And now even 50 years later, the smell of tomato leaves, if I rub them, is my grandfather in motion among dust and stars, made useful. I'll read another poem. Sort of reminds me of that grandfather. He was a rural mail carrier through part of his life, and so was I through about 10 years of my life. And we're going through a time right now, a remarkable situation in which the head of our country is maybe withholding funding from the U.S. Postal Service and then claiming that the U.S. Postal Service does not have funding to deliver ballots. Anyway, this is from my days. Oh, this is from the back of my mail car, which was, I drove through Western Kentucky. And this is, my grandfather recycled a sign where he sold vegetables to make that. I think this was for sweet potatoes, the best I can figure, but not to waste anything. This man who lived through the first pandemic and the Great Depression and tuberculosis. Anyway, this is called Aria for the US Mail. Some days it's all the hope you get. This postal froth and cataract, letters spilling and tumbling down the conveyor, gull white, thin as flounder. Above the flutter of typography and penmanship, the bright stamp depicting a wild bird, a suffragette, the inventor of the threshing machine. The stamp like a tiny sail blown jagged by the bleak winds of cancellation. Some days as you stand at the sorter, your pale blue shirt, knee-high socks, the fact that any word reaches anyone seems miracle enough. that memory has a slim but measurable weight, that thought flies above you in the night over the sooted rooftops, bales and bundles of it, higher than breath or weather, that a letter ever lands on earth seems enough, that you can hold it, sniff it, even steam it open, clutch it to your breast in some private operatic gesture. And we're not talking the love letters of Keats here, or the epistles of Paul. It may be no more, in fact, than a dashed off note, a utility bill, an invitation to a wedding between two people everyone knows should never have met. But still, who's to say? What with the ground not so solid under you, and the world on its flight through practically nothing, there is this tiny message from beyond yourself, for better or worse, in its own shy way, demanding an answer. I had a book come out a couple years ago, which for me is recent. And I'm reading this one also because of Bill's poem about his mother, especially remembering his elderly mother. My mother died not that long ago, and this is a poem called Rehabilitation. I see some faces in the gallery here, so I think maybe I see quite a few people who probably went through something like this. Rehabilitation. 312A has a broken arm, though sometimes it's her leg. Bed 312B has lost her Kleenex and given name. The loss leaks out into the summer grass, which doesn't know it's green, under the sun which is slowly turning to iron. Nevertheless, it's day. 312A was named for a movie star her mother loved. Occasionally, 312B is her own mother, and sometimes she's married to a dream in which she's fallen from everywhere and landed in a tree. How will we ever get down from here? She asks me. I tell her, we're not in a tree. I'm a professional liar. I tell her we'll be fine. The sun will continue for as long as it can. Maybe once we were in a tree, but now we're just down the hall from flocks of nurses wearing flowers. We shall not want, need not toil. Sometimes I'm her son, and sometimes her boyfriend in heaven. Here's a red button to push, and nurses will fly down from their stations. It's fine not to be in a tree anymore. Look, if I raise the blinds, how the grass minds its own business, low and safe. Exactly the color we need it to be. The daylilies, I know some of these people are in roughly my part of the country. The daylilies are just finishing around here. Here's one I just stole from a neighbor. It's a little one. Here's one of the cheap everyday kind from my own yard. So anyway, this is about the daylilies, which are really on their last little petals right now. Which the fact that they bloom at all in northern or almost northern Wisconsin or in Minnesota is amazing to someone who grew up in the South. The daylilies. Whole bees dart into the lilies, but the day is a blossom too. The lilies are huge yellow hybrids mostly. The bees are drowning and luck. I wonder if it even seems like work bounding from anther to anther. I wonder if there's a wake of pollen in the air, a thin gold script to the hive I can't see. A low wind navigates the leaves and slick stalks of the lilies. 6 petals apiece flail outward, mouth-like and deep. And either it's just me or there's something in the flowers. The stamina shot forth brightest flares, the yellow petals ascending to pink, backbending and rippling out paper thin, almost maroon at the edges. It looks like astonishment, scorched halfway to anger. As if even the lilies can't believe, given winter in the bulb, the weight and burn of ice, the long, blind, watery climb to light, a day is all they get. Surely I have a more chipper poem somewhere. But maybe not. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to read this one, maybe partly for Richard and his music and partly for Kris, as it has a little bit of love in it. And it is called, it's just regardless of what we want our children to believe, it's the last poem in my last book. This, by the way, is the Eau Claire River, a couple blocks from here. I recommend it. As rivers goes, it's pretty. The best things in life are the most expensive. Grass, for instance, which shines with the wet light of morning and lines the bottoms of small baskets and valleys, costing all the way from the center of the sun, photons, pinballing their way to the unfurling corona and then smack into the sheen on the face of the grass. And kissing, which cost approximately a fortune and stirred up chemistry and repercussions, betrayals and strollers and sonetry, and then all those shopping days until remorse is done. And snowfall, which is the bread of heaven, though broken by the time it gets here, but lovely when wind carved and shattered into spectral bits by low angles of light. And then training the pine branches to balance the snow, all expensive. And music, which took millions of years of birds and wolves and longing to learn. And true love, which cost an arm and a leg in imagination alone, not to mention the sexual appliances like cars and shoes and well-appointed layers. And words that well up and want to be, but nerve is missing and must be hunted up and down the corridors of the spine, separated out from the more plentiful cut-rate words that shine a little, but soon wreck or stick or cease to console. So expensive. Hardly less than unaffordable are the best things. Time and memory and forgetting. Water wearing over rock, it took half the life of the planet to form. And wishing you could hear it all more deeply and longer, and also silence. I'm trying to pause and let there be silence at the end of the poem. Yeah, that was hope you got my strategy there. Yeah. And okay, so I'll read one more poem. And this is because Joy was mentioned by Joyce in her very first poem, in her comments in the very first poem. And here in Eau Claire, which is not too far from where many of you are, it's not so terrible for it to be 10 below, but I grew up in Kentucky, lived there for 36 years, and so 10 below still is somewhat impressive to me. I heard on public radio one morning that it was 10 below, and I thought, well, that's a nice even number. I think I will go outside and see what 10 below feels like and write a poem about 10 below. I also, first of all, I looked up on my computer what it felt like. So the temperature was 10 below, and I wanted to see what it felt like. And according to my computer, the real temperature was 10 below, and it felt like 10 below. So that didn't help at all. One other thing I'll just say is that I used to think that joy or happiness was the result of having things right, that it was sort of like the reward. And this poem was going to be called 10 Below. And it was only when I got to the end of it that its name got changed to Joy. And I think maybe I was coming to the conclusion that maybe joy was the means rather than the end. And I had them confused. Anyway, joy. Just to know how it felt, I stood under the red pine. It was 10 below, and the sun was not quite up and the moon not quite down, and the air so cold, you couldn't call it cold anymore, but sort of comical on the intake. And the lungs were like, are you serious? The small 3-pronged tracks in the snow belonged to creatures no longer of this earth. The paw prints as well were the only traces of what we once called rabbits when such things bounded from the shrubberies. And the light, which began to climb over the rim of horizon, appeared stunned, like ancestors in old photographs seem stunned. You look at them in their suspenders and bonnets, the austerity of their faces, as if they knew even then, in the minute's wait for the shutter to close, they were goners. As if they knew the reason for the picture was time without pity. So I stood under the red pine, took a few more breaths from deep in the glacial instant of my one and only life, which hurt a little, like joy, by which I mean the edge of joy, where it sharpens itself for the work it has to do. Thank you.
That was Max Garland. It's dusk here in St. Paul, outdoors as I am, so it's time to part. Thanks to everyone for joining us. And I need to tell you that next month's Dave Shove Midstream reading will be on Thursday, September 10th, the second Thursday of the month. The readers will be Jane Dickerson, Carol Masters, Kris Norbury, and a fourth reader to be announced. So please join me in one more round of applause for tonight's readers, followed by your chance to react, discuss, ask questions, and generally misbehave in our riotous, cacophonous free-for-all. So again, once again, please, Joyce Sutphen, Bill Reichard, Kris Bigalk, Max Garland.